your father and I talked incessantly about the program. Incessantly. That's why it's so good. It has his thinking and my thinking. As soon as I knew what my dissertation, I must have just about finished my academic work. And I had in mind I must have told you this, I was going to do a dissertation on gifted children. But then Sal and Bob asked me to think up a program to prevent high school dropout in the, quotes, the ghetto, as we called the Freeport, the black part of Freeport at that time. And so I didn't think of this all by myself. I began to do a lot of reading, and then also there were a couple of social workers at, this was not at Family Service, it was a branch of Family Service in Freeport. They had some idea of home visits, of doing home visits. And I began to have the idea of bringing toys and books. In fact, I remember looking through a catalog with Bob suddenly. And then at the same time, I was doing a lot of reading. And it dawned on me that the key to the problems, the school problems of poor kids, is that they didn't have enough language in their homes before. And that I remember having a discussion with Leo and Leo Wolf. He said, my kids don't even know their name. He was a principal at that time. They don't even know their names when they've come into kindergarten. Well, they know their names as Babe or some nickname. I did a lot of creative thinking as a teacher. My classes were inspired by my creativeness, because in my classes I was a progressive teacher, to my principal's despair, horror, and disapproval, because so much noise was coming out of my classroom. You know that I had classes coming in every half hour with something called the, have I told you about this? It was something called the platoon system in Detroit, because it meant that two classes could be in an auditorium. They would have a class called auditorium or gym. Two classes could be in there at one time. And they'd have the kids moving from class to class every half hour. So within a half hour, I would have the kids, I would have started them, I would have started the unit, whatever we were supposed to be doing, the book we were supposed to be reading, and I would read them, you know, if it was little short stories for the first graders and more complicated books, fourth graders, eighth graders. Then they would divide into groups to play out the stories. And so there would be a group that was doing puppets. There was a group that was doing murals. I covered all the blackboards with white newsprint, you know, the big sheets of white paper. And each class was assigned a portion of the blackboard. And so a group of kids would be doing a mural. 50 kids at a time. I once, near the end of my teaching career, I went to visit every single child. I was working with Franz Radel. I was taking an independent study course with him. It wasn't a course, it was just us chatting, really. And we decided that I would go to the homes of one class. That's 50 homes I visited. And I learned such things about each child that I didn't know before. I think that's when I decided to stop teaching and become a social worker, besides being so tired at the end of the day. You can imagine I'd have, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of these classes coming in my room.
What do you remember about what their homes were like?
Not a thing. They were all lower middle class. They were homes, they weren't apartments. These were all white kids. I think their fathers were practically all working in a factory.
This was during the Depression.
No, was it during the Depression? I graduated in 1935, I think. Yeah, it was during the Depression.
But all of the kids' parents, they all had houses and their parents, fathers all had jobs.
Wooden houses. Well, I'm not remembering really, because I'm seeing only one kid's house and one silent, big kid, blonde kid. And he was such a revelation when I visited his home. He was talking, and he and his parents were talking to each other. It was not as I had observed him. I'm sure that that's when I became very interested in individual kids. And the only way I investigated becoming either a psychologist or a social worker, and I preferred being a social worker because all psychologists seemed to do was to give these kids dumb tests. I mean, very limited kinds of tests, not anything like what psychologists do nowadays. Psychometricians is what they were. So I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to interact with kids and families, and social workers did that. And in fact, I did a volunteer project of some kind where I was the person in charge of a waiting room at a court, possibly, where the kids would be left while their parents were doing something, possibly at a court, they were in court for some reason. And I got very interested in individual kids. And also, I organized kids in my neighborhood to be a club. I think I have even pictures. And to make marionettes, because I remember the picture of the kids with their marionettes. We were a very creative family without ever thinking about it. And we did all of this on no money. We were almost on welfare in Detroit.
Your father lost his job?
Didn't have a job because he was also always an entrepreneur. So he tried to support us by selling fake furs from door to door. Why didn't I start feeling old and so on? I don't feel old right now. I'm 85 years old. It never occurred to me, to think, my goodness, I'm more than 50 years old and I'm just starting off on a new enterprise.
So that in a way, your project
defines my years.
Kept you young.
Yes, naturally. I don't know why I didn't reflect about these things, but I didn't.